I want you to picture something for me. You are driving down a treacherous, winding mountain
All
pass.
right, in the dead of winter.
Exactly. It's the dead of winter, and you are racing against this brutal weather system that meteorologists are calling a once-in-a-generation blizzard,
A total whiteout.
a total whiteout. And you are exhausted. Your tires are slipping on the ice. You're running on absolute fumes, relying on, just the sheer force of caffeine and anxiety to keep your eyes open.
Yeah, that terrifying highway hypnosis.
Right. And finally, the elements just beat you. The snow is too deep, the visibility is literally zero, and you are forced to pull your car over at this desolate, remote rest stop nestled high up in the Rocky Mountains.
9,000 feet up, right?
Yeah, way up there. The power inside the building is flickering. You check your phone, and there's absolutely zero cell service. You are entirely, profoundly cut off from the rest of the world.
Completely isolated.
Completely. And inside this tiny, brightly lit visitor center, you find yourself trapped for the night with 4 complete strangers. People you have never seen before, people you will likely never see again.
It's basically a locked room mystery setup.
It really is. Now, here is the nightmare scenario. You step back outside into the freezing dark for just a moment to clear your head. You brush the snow off the window of a parked van belonging to one of these strangers. And looking back at you through the frost is a terrified, kidnapped child locked inside a dog kennel.
God, just a horrifying image.
It is. You are completely alone. No police are coming.
Yeah.
And one of the 4 people drinking coffee inside that cozy little room is a monster.
That is the exact terrifying scenario we are unpacking today. We're looking at excerpts from Taylor Adams' incredible thriller novel, No Exit.
Such an intense source material.
Oh, absolutely. This text drops us right into the frozen, desperate world of a college student named Darby Thorne, who finds herself living out that exact nightmare.
Poor Derby.
Yeah, but our mission today goes far beyond simply recounting the plot of a suspense story. We are going to extract the profound psychological insights embedded within this narrative.
Right, because there's so much beneath the surface here.
Exactly. We're going to break down the raw neurological mechanics of human survival under extreme duress. We'll explore the chilling psychology of psychopaths who hide in plain sight.
The ones who weaponize our own societal norms against us.
Precisely. We're going to examine the bystander effect, but almost in reverse.
What happens when you're the only bystander?
Right. What happens to the human brain when you're the only bystander and you are forced to act? And finally, we will analyze the cognitive shift that occurs when ordinary, everyday objects suddenly become improvised tools for life or death.
Okay, let's unpack this. I want to start with the sheer architecture of the isolation in this story. Because the author doesn't just put Darby in a bad situation, the environment itself acts as the ultimate insurmountable antagonist before the human villain even reveals themselves.
The setting is definitely a character in its own right.
It really is. Let's look at Darby Thorne. She's an art sophomore at CU Boulder. She's running on way too much coffee, driving a beat-up '94 Honda Civic that she affectionately calls Blue.
A '94 Civic in a blizzard is basically a death trap.
A total death trap. And she is racing home to Utah for a devastating reason. Her mother, Maya, is dying of late-stage pancreatic cancer.
That emotional weight is crucial to her state of mind.
It changes everything. So Darby gets trapped in this brutal blizzard at a Colorado rest stop named Wanapani. And as the text points out, Wanapani ominously translates from the local Paiute tribe language to Big Double.
A little foreshadowing there.
A lot of foreshadowing. The environmental details are so visceral. Her left windshield wiper literally snaps off in the wind and twirls away into the dark, blinding her on one side.
Stripping away her resources piece by piece.
Exactly. Her phone battery is steadily bleeding out in the cold. We see it drop to 9% and then down to 4%.
Which is pure anxiety for anyone today.
Absolutely. As she pulls into the rest stop, she passes an eerily ironic sign that reads, 365 days since the last fatal accident.
Wow. Resetting the clock.
Yeah, it makes this night feel like some grim anniversary. And all the while, playing mockingly on the staticky radio is Bing Crosby's White Christmas. The author is systematically stripping away every single lifeline this young woman has.
It is a phenomenal depiction of what psychologists call the cutoff.
The cutoff.
Yeah. When we talk about survival psychology, the environment is never just a backdrop. It is an active participant in shaping a person's cognitive state. What the text does so effectively is layer different types of isolation to systematically dismantle Darby's psychological safety nets.
So it's not just the snow.
No, first you have the physical cutoff. She is stranded 9,000 feet above sea level.
Right.
At that altitude, there is roughly 30% less effective oxygen than at sea level. The human brain is already operating at a physiological deficit.
Which impairs decision-making. Right.
Exactly. It impairs executive function. Combine that with the extreme cold, which forces the body to shunt blood away from the extremities and prioritize core organs, and you have a physical system under massive stress.
Just biologically, she's already fighting a battle.
Then you have the severing of communication. The cell signal is dead. The emergency radio broadcasts are just garbled static. But the most profound layer of isolation here is emotional.
That emotional layer is heavy. Darby isn't just trying to get home. She's carrying this massive burden of an unresolved fight with her dying mother.
The Thanksgiving fight.
Yes, on Thanksgiving, she told her mother, quote, "You're the reason Dad left us. And if I could have chosen him instead of you, I would have, in a heartbeat."
That is brutal.
It's a crushing weight to carry when you suddenly find out that person is on their deathbed.
It creates an overwhelming cognitive load.
Tell me more about that.
Cognitive load. In psychology, cognitive load refers to the total amount of mental effort being used in the working memory. Darby's working memory is completely saturated with grief, guilt, and the impending loss of her mother.
So she barely has any mental bandwidth left for an actual emergency.
Precisely. When you combine physical entrapment, digital silence, and that level of emotional turmoil, you create a psychological pressure cooker.
A pressure cooker waiting to explode.
The human brain relies heavily on external tethers, our phones, our routines, our social networks, to regulate anxiety. We outsource our stress to these tools.
Oh, that makes so much sense. We outsource the stress.
When those tethers are violently snapped, the brain is forced into a primal state of vulnerability. The prefrontal cortex, which handles logical reasoning, struggles to maintain control over the amygdala, which is the brain's fear center.
I want you, the listener, to really think about your own reliance on technology right now. Think about how many times a day you reach for your phone to solve a minor inconvenience.
Or just to look up a simple fact.
Right, or to text a friend for advice, or just to doom scroll and distract yourself from an uncomfortable thought. How would your brain react if that digital tether was completely severed in a life or death situation?
Most people would completely panic.
Darby is sitting in her freezing car, watching her battery tick down like a doomsday clock, clutching a text from her sister that just says, "She's okay right now."
Which is so vague.
It has to be the most ambiguous, terrifying qualifier in the English language. Right now.
In true isolation, without the ability to outsource that anxiety, an individual is forced into a state of stark, unmitigated self-reliance. Darby can't call 911.
She can't ask her sister what to do.
She is left entirely to her own cognitive devices. The environment has primed her nervous system to either completely break down and dissociate or hyper-focus on survival.
And she has to make that choice pretty quickly.
This psychological priming is absolutely critical for understanding how she processes the horrific discovery she is about to make. She's already operating at the absolute limits of her emotional bandwidth before she even steps out of her car.
Which brings us to the discovery that shatters whatever fragile illusion of normalcy Darby was trying to maintain.
Walk outside.
Yes, she ventures outside the visitor center into the freezing snow, just walking past the few parked vehicles to get some air. She passes a gray Chevy Astro van.
The description of this van is so unsettling.
The text describes it perfectly. It has this faded, creepy decal of an orange cartoon fox wielding a nail gun.
A nail gun?
With the motto, "We finish what we start."
Chilling.
Darby glances at the rear window, which is half obscured by frost and towels, and she sees something impossible. A tiny pale hand wrapping its fingers around a wire grate.
Just a flash of a hand.
She wipes the frost off the glass, peers into the dark, foul-smelling van, and she realizes she's looking at a little girl.
A child in a cage.
The child is locked inside a dog kennel. The specific details are horrifying. The circular combination lock holding the cage shut, the crude loops of black electrical tape reinforcing it, the wire bars crusted with what she later realizes is dried blood.
It is pure terror.
But what really struck me is what Darby does next. She doesn't scream, she doesn't grab a tire iron and smash the window.
No, her initial reaction is actually a textbook demonstration of cognitive dissonance and normalcy bias.
What's fascinating here is how her brain just sort of short-circuits.
Exactly. What's fascinating here is that instead of springing into immediate heroic action, her brain actively tries to reject the visual information it has just received.
She steps back from the van.
She asks herself, did I imagine it? She tries to convince herself it was a plastic doll hand, or maybe a dog's paw.
Or just a hallucination brought on by exhaustion and those caffeine pills she's been taking.
It's almost frustrating to read at first because you're shouting at the page, do something.
But then she actually goes back inside the visitor center, walks up to the little complimentary coffee counter, and deliberately pours herself a cup of hot chocolate from a carafe that is misspelled C-O-C-O.
And she doesn't even like hot chocolate.
She hates it. She burns her tongue on it. She stands there sipping a drink she hates just to stall.
That behavior, as bizarre as it seems from the outside, is a highly documented psychological defense mechanism against severe trauma or shock.
Normalcy bias.
Yes, we are looking at normalcy bias in real time. Normalcy bias is a cognitive phenomenon where people disbelieve or minimize threat warnings.
They just assume things will be fine because they usually are fine.
The brain assumes that since things have always functioned in a certain way, they will continue to function that way. Think about historical disasters.
Like what?
During the 9/11 attacks, there were documented cases of people in the towers taking the time to shut down their computers, put on their coats, and pack their briefcases before evacuating, even though the building was literally on fire.
That is wild to think about.
The brain seeks out routine, automatic behaviors to anchor itself when the world suddenly stops making sense.
So pouring the hot cocoa is her version of shutting down the computer before the building collapses.
Exactly that. Her reality, which was just a boring, annoying night trapped at a snowed-in rest stop, is violently clashing with this new, incomprehensible information.
That a brutal child abduction is in progress right in front of her.
The human brain naturally seeks to resolve cognitive dissonance by favoring the more mundane, less threatening explanation.
The author actually explicitly connects this to how Darby reacted earlier to her mother's cancer diagnosis.
Right, the cheeseburger scene.
When Darby received the text that her mother was terminal, she didn't immediately break down weeping. Instead, she walked to the student union, ordered a cheeseburger, paid with a crumpled $10 bill, took 2 normal bites, and then sprinted to the bathroom to violently vomit.
Pouring the hot cocoa is her mind's way of eating the cheeseburger. It is a desperate grasp for normalcy.
Her brain is whispering, if I am doing a normal thing like drinking hot cocoa in a lobby, then I am in a normal situation, and the horror outside in the van isn't real.
But the horror is real.
And once that denial wears off, the cocoa burns her tongue and she snaps back to reality. She's forced to look around that brightly lit visitor center and face the threat matrix.
Because she knows one of them owns that van.
She realizes the owner of that van, the kidnapper, has to be one of the 4 strangers sharing this claustrophobic room with her. She engages in this terrifying mental process of elimination.
Let's break down those suspects.
Let's look at the suspects the text gives us. First, you have Ed. He's an older guy, maybe late 50s, silver goatee, wearing a rugged Carhartt jacket.
He's the one who admits to being a relapsed alcoholic.
Yeah, a former veterinarian who hides liquor in toilet tanks to get through the night. Then there's Sandy, his cousin.
She seems pretty detached from everything.
She seems entirely focused on playing tablet games and reading a paperback murder mystery called Luck of the Devil.
A bit on the nose.
For sure. Then we have Lars. Lars is a 19-year-old mouth breather with a weak chin, patchy peach fuzz whiskers, wearing a Deadpool beanie.
He's the one who immediately sets off alarm bells.
He lingers uncomfortably by the door, staring at Darby. He breathes heavily down her neck. He reeks of cheap chocolate and chewing tobacco, and he is constantly audibly farting.
Very unpleasant details.
And finally, there's Ashley. Ashley is handsome, broad-shouldered, charismatic. He claims to be an accounting student in Salt Lake City and a former silver medal-winning child magician.
He even shares a vulnerable story with the group.
Right, about being trapped in a coal mine as a kid to explain why he has a bizarre phobia of door hinges. So Darby looks around this room, and her brain immediately zeroes in on Lars.
I mean, Lars practically wears a neon sign that says creep.
And this is a brilliant exploration of how the human brain relies on heuristics to quickly assess threats.
Heuristics are essentially mental shortcuts. Evolutionarily, early humans didn't have the time to sit down and logically deduce if a rustle in the bushes was a tiger or just the wind.
You just run.
You had to make a rapid judgment based on limited information to survive. We still use these shortcuts today, especially in social situations.
So her shortcut points straight to Lars.
Lars looks and acts like our cultural archetype of a monster. He violates social norms, he has poor hygiene, poor social skills, he violates personal space, and his overall aesthetic is deeply off-putting.
He triggers our disease avoidance heuristics and our stranger danger conditioning.
So Darby's brain uses a very simple heuristic.
Mm.
He looks dangerous, he acts weird, therefore he is the danger.
While on the flip side, she looks at Ashley and feels instantly at ease.
Because of the halo effect.
I have to challenge you, the listener, right now. Put yourself in that room. Be completely honest with yourself. If you were trapped in a claustrophobic space with these four people, wouldn't you naturally gravitate toward the charming guy with the great smile who makes self-deprecating jokes?
Most people absolutely would.
Wouldn't you instinctively distance yourself from the creepy guy lingering by the door who smells like chewing tobacco?
That is the trap, though, and it is exactly what predators rely on. Ashley benefits massively from what psychologists call the halo effect.
Explain the halo effect for us.
It's a cognitive bias, where our overall impression of a person influences how we feel and think about their character. Specifically, evolutionary biology has wired us to associate physical symmetry and attractiveness with health, good genetics, and by a flawed logical leap trustworthiness and moral goodness.
So because he's good-looking, we assume he's a good person.
Exactly. Ashley is physically attractive, well-spoken, and displays pro-social behaviors. He engages in card games with the older couple, he makes eye contact, and crucially, he shares personal vulnerabilities, like the coal mine story.
Giving them a fake weakness.
By offering a fake weakness, he disarms the natural skepticism of the people around him. Darby's heuristic tells her he is charming and open, therefore he is an ally.
But doesn't that make our natural empathy and our instincts a massive liability in a survival situation?
It certainly can be.
If our brains are wired to trust a smile, how do we ever spot the actual threat?
It absolutely can be a liability, which is why threat assessment in modern society is so complex. Psychopaths and highly manipulative individuals are often keenly aware of these exact heuristics.
They know how to game the system.
They don't just happen to be charming, they weaponize pro-social cues. Think of historical examples like Ted Bundy, who famously wore a fake cast on his arm and dropped his books to elicit help from his victims.
Playing on people's desire to help.
He used the cultural script of helping a disabled, handsome student to override their survival instincts. Ashley's charm is a carefully constructed camouflage.
So Darby's initial threat matrix is entirely backwards because she is relying on surface-level social conditioning rather than objective evidence.
But to her credit, even with her flawed assessment of who the monster is, she knows she has to do something.
She doesn't just freeze up forever.
She begins the psychological shift from being a passive victim of circumstance to taking active survivalist steps.
And that transition is incredible to watch because Darby is an art student. She has zero military training. She doesn't own a weapon. She weighs maybe 110 pounds.
But she realizes she has to confirm what she saw and try to free the little girl.
So she goes back out to the freezing ban. She takes off her Converse sneaker, pulls out the shoelace, and ties a slip knot with freezing, trembling fingers.
The ingenuity there is just remarkable.
It's pure MacGyver. She works that shoelace through the tiny gap in the van's door to loop around the lock pin inside. The tension the author builds in this scene is unbelievable.
You're holding your breath the whole time.
She manages to pop the lock with a shoelace and slip into the back of the van where she finally talks to the little girl whose name is Jay.
But then the nightmare escalates again.
Lars comes out of the visitor center to start the van to keep the engine warm. Darby has no time to run. She has to dive under a musty, filthy Navajo rug in the back of the van and hide, literally inches away from him.
How does someone with zero tactical training even begin to process that kind of power imbalance?
Right. The agony of this suspense is visceral. She is crammed in the back, sweating in her heavy winter coat as the van's heater blasts and the temperature rises to 80 degrees.
While Lars is sitting in the driver's seat, totally oblivious.
He's eating a Baby Ruth candy bar, he's farting loudly into the enclosed space and laughing to himself, and he's listening to Bing Crosby's White Christmas yet again.
He has absolutely no idea Darby is practically under his boots.
The sensory details the text provides. The smell of the farts mixed with stale sweat, the sickly sweet scent of hidden ranch dressing, and the terrifying unspilled bottles of bleach and gasoline nearby. It grounds the horror in this grotesque, mundane reality.
The contrast between the mundane elements, a Baby Ruth, a Bing Crosby song, and the horrific reality of the kidnapping is what makes this sequence so psychologically piercing.
It's the birth of asymmetrical combat.
Yes. In military terms, asymmetrical warfare is when two combatants possess vastly different resources and tactics. Darby cannot win a direct physical confrontation against grown men who she suspects are armed.
So she has to fight dirty.
She must rely on stealth, improvisation, and the environment. The use of the shoelace is a perfect example of repurposing a benign object for infiltration.
But the psychological shift occurring under that rug is far more important than the physical tactics, isn't it?
Absolutely. When Darby is hiding, paralyzed by the fear of discovery, she is still operating as prey. Her heart rate is likely at its maximum, her body is flooded with cortisol, and her primary drive is simply to not be seen.
But something changes after Lars leaves and she talks to Jay again. She makes a promise to this little girl. She says, "I'm going to get you out of here."
That commitment changes her neurochemistry.
And suddenly, she's not just hiding anymore. She goes back inside the visitor center and she subtly kicks a loose decorative stone out from the mortar of the coffee counter.
Gathering her arsenal.
She palms it, slips it into her pocket. Later, she puts that heavy stone inside one of Ashley's thick wool socks to create an improvised weapon, a rock and a sock.
A classic, brutal, improvised tool.
She also readies her keys, gripping her sharpest door key between her knuckles like brass knuckles. She even offers Jay a 2-inch Swiss Army knife to cut through the kennel bars.
That is the exact moment the psychological transition occurs. By creating the rock in a sock and gripping the keys, Darby is psychologically transitioning from prey to predator.
She's gearing up to hunt.
She is consciously preparing to initiate violence. This requires a massive override of the typical human aversion to causing physical harm. Adrenaline is shifting from a flight mechanism to a fight mechanism.
The prefrontal cortex is making a calculated decision to engage in lethal or near-lethal force.
But the arsenal difference is staggering.
I mean, let's look at what the enemy has. Darby has a shoelace, a rock and a sock, a tiny pocket knife, and her dorm keys. What does the enemy have?
We learn Lars has a heavy .45 caliber pistol tucked into his jacket.
But the text reveals something even more chilling. When Darby is talking to Jay in the back of the van, she notices the little girl's hand is heavily bandaged with black electrical tape.
The yellow card.
Jay tells her it's a yellow card. Darby asks what that means, and Jay explains that when she misbehaved, the kidnappers held her hand down and shot a steel nail through her flesh using a pneumatic nail gun.
A nail gun.
That cartoon fox on the side of the van wielding a nail gun wasn't just a quirky logo. It was a horrifying, brazen hint at the implements of torture they keep inside.
Hiding in plain sight.
The sheer brutality of punishing a 7-year-old child with a construction power tool is just mind-boggling.
It establishes the absolute psychological depravity of the antagonists. A .45 caliber pistol is generally a weapon of execution or defense. It operates at a distance, it's impersonal, and the violence is instantaneous.
But a nail gun?
A pneumatic nail gun used on a child's hand is an instrument of deliberate, intimate torture. Think about the mechanics required to execute that action.
With physical force involved.
The perpetrator has to physically overpower the child, hold her hand flat against the surface, press the safety contact of the heavy power tool directly against her skin, look her in the eye, and pull the trigger.
It's sadistic.
The psychology of sadism deriving pleasure, or a sense of absolute control from inflicting pain, is very different from instrumental violence, which is just violence used as a means to an end.
Like shooting someone during a robbery.
Right. Executing a yellow card tells Darby exactly what kind of psychopathy she is up against. It obliterates any lingering hope she might have had that these are just desperate people who made a mistake and can be reasoned with.
It is an act of pure sadism designed to break the child's will and enforce total physical dominance.
And it is that exact revelation of sadism that pushes Darby to realize she cannot do this alone.
She looks at her rock and a sock and realizes it's not enough against a gun and a nail gun. She needs an ally. She needs the strongest, most capable person in the room.
And because her heuristics have already categorized him as the good guy, she chooses Ashley.
Here's where it gets really interesting. She subtly passes him a note written on a brown napkin, and they arrange to meet in the men's restroom to talk privately. Here's where the tension just redlines.
Lars follows them.
Lars follows them right into the restroom. To maintain their cover, Ashley grabs Darby and kisses her, pretending they just snuck away from the old folks in the lobby for a quick hookup.
A very convincing act.
Lars watches them for a moment, slowly washes his hands, and leaves. After the door closes, Darby spills everything to Ashley.
She gives him all her intel.
She shows him a blurry cell phone photo she took of Jay behind the kennel bars. She actually hands him the rock and a sock. She lays out her entire tactical plan to lure Lars outside and ambush him.
And Ashley plays the part flawlessly.
He acts shocked. He claims his asthma is acting up. He seems genuinely reluctant, but eventually he agrees to help because he sees how desperate she is. They coordinate a signal.
The plan is set.
Darby walks outside into the freezing snow to lure Lars, expecting Ashley to sneak up behind Lars and hit him with the rock. But the trap fails. Lars doesn't follow her out.
So she goes to the van anyway.
Darby walks over to the van, opens the door, and starts talking to Jay again, and then the author pulls the rug right out from under us.
In magic, the final act of a trick, the reveal that defies all expectations, is called the prestige.
The prestige.
Given Ashley's background as a child magician, the term is highly appropriate here. The prestige of this narrative occurs when Darby realizes, to her absolute paralyzing horror, that Ashley isn't an innocent bystander who got roped into her plan.
He is the mastermind.
He's the mastermind of the entire kidnapping.
Yeah.
And Lars, the mouth-breathing creep she assumed was the soul monster, is actually Ashley's younger brother and subservient accomplice.
The realization is just gut-wrenching. Darby is standing outside the van, the wind howling, the snow falling, and she looks back to see the front door of the visitor center open.
And out they step.
Ashley and Lars step out and stand there together. Ashley is casually swinging the rock in a sock that Darby literally just made for him.
Her own weapon.
She had handed him her only weapon. She had told him her entire plan, her deepest fears, her vulnerabilities. He put his tongue in her mouth to quote-unquote hide from his own brother.
The sheer scale of the betrayal is staggering.
How does a person like Ashley even operate in society? How does a brain function like that?
We are looking at a textbook presentation of the dark triad of personality traits: narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy.
Ashley is a highly functional psychopath.
He views every single human interaction as a performance, a manipulation, a game to be won. Later in the text, he actually explains his worldview to Darby, using a fascinating analogy.
The kaiju analogy.
Yes, he tells her he views himself and Lars as the monsters in a kaiju movie like Godzilla.
Monsters stomping on a city.
In his mind, these massive, superior monsters enter a city, fight, take what they want, and destroy everything. And the ordinary humans, people like Darby, Ed, and Sandy, are just useless bystanders.
NPCs in a video game.
They're completely powerless non-player characters in his game. Their only role is to either get crushed or run away. This analogy is incredibly revealing of a psychopathic mindset.
It demonstrates a profound grandiosity.
Grandiosity and a complete lack of effective empathy. Ashley doesn't see other people as human beings with intrinsic value, emotions, or rights. He sees them merely as props in his performance, or as acceptable collateral damage.
Think about that for a second. Have you ever encountered someone in your life, maybe not a murderer, but a boss, a coworker, a toxic partner, who treats every single interaction like a chess match they have to win?
Someone who mirrors your emotions just to figure out what strings to pull.
Right. Ashley weaponizes Darby's own empathy against her. He tells her to her face that her desire to play the hero makes her predictable.
Predictable, because she cares.
He knew that because she cared about a stranger's child, she could be controlled. He even admits with a smile that he enjoys watching her suffer. It is terrifying because he is so deeply rational about it.
That's a crucial point. To most of us, empathy is a pro-social trait, a virtue that binds society together. But to a psychopath, empathy is not a feeling. It is an algorithm to be hacked.
An algorithm to be hacked, wow.
It is a predictable set of inputs and outputs.
Oh.
Ashley recognized Darby's moral compass immediately in that lobby. He knew she wouldn't just walk away from a freezing child in a cage.
So he didn't need to physically restrain her initially.
He just needed to use her own morality as a leash. He allowed her to think she was in control, organizing the ambush in the bathroom, when in reality he was the director of the entire play, amusing himself with her predictable reactions.
And this realization leads to one of the most agonizing dynamics in the story when they are all forced back inside the lobby standoff.
This sequence is a masterclass in psychological warfare.
Darby manages to temporarily escape the brothers outside by diving headfirst through a tiny elevated window into the women's restroom, bruising her spine on a toilet in the process.
But she is trapped inside the building.
Right, and forced to walk back out into the main lobby. So now you have this excruciating tension. You are in a brightly lit room. Ed and Sandy are sitting right there, completely oblivious to the fact that they are sharing oxygen with two armed child abductors.
Ed is cheerfully talking about making instant cowboy coffee.
Sandy is dozing on a wooden bench with a paperback resting on her face. And right in the middle of this domestic mundane scene, a life-or-death hostage negotiation is happening in plain sight.
It's surreal.
Ashley sits across the table from Darby. He slides her very own brown napkin back to her, and on the back he has written, "If you tell them, I kill them both." He is referring to Ed and Sandy.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, what Ashley's doing here is utilizing the concept of collateral damage as a psychological control mechanism.
He has placed Darby in an impossible moral double bind.
In game theory, this is psychological checkmate. If she screams for help or if she tries to tell Ed and Sandy the truth about the van, Ashley will immediately pull his gun and execute those innocent bystanders.
And Ashley ensures that the guilt of their deaths would rest squarely on Darby's shoulders.
By doing this, Ashley forces his victim to become actively complicit in her own captivity. He weaponizes her conscience against her, ensuring her silence not through physical gags or ropes, but through the threat of harm to others.
It is a profoundly isolating experience. She is sitting 3 feet away from potential allies, yet she is completely cut off from them by an invisible, impenetrable wall of threat.
And Ashley just revels in the power.
He physically dominates her right at the table to prove he can. When Darby whispers something defiant back to him, he suddenly lunges forward, grabs her hair, and violently smashes her face into the hard table, breaking her nose.
Blood is instantly pouring down her face.
Sandy wakes up, startled by the noise, and asks what happened, and Ashley, without missing a beat, smoothly lies to the room and says it's the high altitude causing a sudden nosebleed.
Blaming the environment.
He forces Darby to play along with the lie. He makes her agree that it's just the altitude, while she sits there choking on her own blood. He even leans in and demands that she smile. "Smile, you'll live longer," he tells her.
It's so sick.
But here is where Darby's resilience truly shines. To keep the facade going, Ashley tries to resume this circle time getting-to-know-you game they were playing earlier in the evening.
The ultimate power play.
He asks Darby what her biggest fear is, fully expecting her to say guns or being murdered or him. He wants her to acknowledge his power.
Instead, she flips the script.
She stares right into his dead green eyes, blood dripping off her chin, and says her biggest fear is failure, letting someone get kidnapped or killed.
That moment is pivotal for understanding survival psychology. We need to talk about locus of control.
Wait, let me stop you there. When you say locus of control, are you talking about her internal belief that her choices still matter in this room, even when a guy with a gun is telling her they don't?
Precisely. Locus of control is a psychological concept that refers to how strongly people believe they have control over the situations and experiences that affect their lives.
So what's an external locus?
An individual with an external locus of control believes that outcomes are dictated by fate, luck, or powerful external forces, like a psychopath with a gun. If Darby fully adopted an external locus of control here, she would submit, break down, and accept her role as a helpless victim.
But she doesn't.
No. An individual with an internal locus of control believes that their own actions, no matter how small, can influence the outcome. Despite the broken nose, despite the impossible odds and the hostage dynamic, Darby signals defiance.
By looking him in the eye and stating her commitment to the victim, she is insisting on her agency.
She is communicating that her moral imperative stopping the kidnapping supersedes her fear for her own biological survival. She refuses to let Ashley reduce her to a compliant object.
This psychological defiance, this assertion of an internal locus of control, is the necessary precursor to the visceral physical combat that immediately follows.
Her mind refuses to yield, which eventually gives her exhausted body permission to fight back with lethal intent.
And fight back she does. The tension finally snaps. Ed innocently leaves the room to get the coffee from his truck, leaving Darby alone in the lobby with the 2 killers.
Her one window of opportunity.
She knows this is her one and only chance before they execute her. She runs back toward the restroom, planning to sprint and dive out that tiny, elevated triangular window again. The pacing in the text here is absolutely frantic.
A literal leap of faith.
She takes a running start down the slippery linoleum floor, leaps into the air, and catches the wooden frame of the window with her fingertips. She is literally dangling 8 feet off the ground, trying to pull her bruised body through the tight space.
But Lars has circled the building.
Lars has circled the building and is waiting outside the window with his gun pointed at her head. She is trapped in the frame. And then Ashley comes into the restroom behind her.
The suffocation sequence.
He pulls a thick plastic Ziploc bag over her head, twisting it tight around her neck. He is trying to suffocate her.
The physiology of this struggle is a horrific, visceral representation of the human fight-or-flight response in its absolute final, most desperate stages.
What's happening to her body right then?
As the plastic bag cuts off her oxygen supply, Darby's body experiences severe hypercapnia.
Hypercapnia.
Yes, hypercapnia is the rapid buildup of carbon dioxide in the bloodstream. When blood CO2 levels rise, the blood's pH drops, becoming highly acidic. The brain, specifically the amygdala in the brainstem, detects this acidity and triggers a primal, overwhelming panic response.
It's the body's ultimate alarm bell screaming that death is imminent.
Her heart rate skyrockets to try to circulate whatever oxygen is left. Adrenaline violently floods her system, and her muscles contract involuntarily. The text describes her lungs burning, her vision narrowing into a dark tunnel.
And this physical trauma is compounded by the blood pouring from her broken nose, which she is actively choking on inside the sealed plastic bag.
It is a dual mechanism of asphyxiation. But what's truly remarkable from a neurological standpoint is the cognitive process occurring concurrently with this physiological shutdown.
Her mind is still working.
As her body weakens and the hypercapnia takes over, her conscious mind seeks a reason to keep fighting against the dying of light.
Exactly. Because as she is fading, as her vision is going black, Ashley is whispering in her ear through the plastic, taunting her.
He brings up her mother.
He brings up her mother's pancreatic cancer. He says, "You were so certain you'd bury your mom, but it turns out you had it backwards. She's going to bury you."
That cruelty, that is a spark.
That sadistic taunt is what saves her life. Darby realizes that if she dies right here on this filthy bathroom floor, she will never get to apologize to her mother for the terrible things she said on Thanksgiving.
Those hateful words will be her final legacy on Earth.
And she realizes that if she dies, no one will be left to save Jay. The intense burning guilt and the rage at his taunt provide a massive, final surge of primal energy.
A surge born of pure will.
She arches her back against the wall, bites down hard on the plastic bag, covering her mouth, ripping a tiny hole in it. She sucks in a rush of air, and with that single breath of oxygen, she throws her entire body weight backwards, slamming Ashley's head into the heavy porcelain sink.
It is a profound illustration of how emotional anchors, even incredibly painful ones like guilt, regret, and spite, can override physiological exhaustion and biological shutdown.
We see this in extreme survival accounts throughout history, don't we?
We do. The human will to live is deeply intertwined with our connections to others and our search for meaning. As Viktor Frankl noted in his psychological studies of concentration camp survivors, those who had a why to live for could bear almost anyhow.
So Darby's why is her mom and Jay.
Darby isn't just fighting for her own biological survival. She's fighting for the opportunity for redemption with her dying mother. And she is fighting for the life of an innocent child. That meaning gives her the sheer physical strength to execute a complex physical maneuver while suffocating.
And there is a crucial tactical detail in this scuffle. As she slams him backward and breaks free of his grip, her hands tangle in his jacket, and she manages to steal the red lanyard holding all of his keys.
The keys.
That single red lanyard represents a massive shift in the power dynamic. She escapes out the window, tumbling down into the deep snow outside, gasping for air, and she realizes she has the keys to the kidnapper's van.
She has stolen their mobility.
She realizes her best, and honestly only option, is to run to the van, lock herself inside with Jay, and try to drive a massive Chevy Astro down a treacherous mountain pass through a whiteout blizzard.
It's a desperate, likely suicidal gamble, but it's all she has left.
She sprints through the knee-deep snow, Lars and Ashley recovering and hot on her heels. She gets to the van. She's frantically fumbling with the keys in the pitch dark, trying to find the right ignition key.
And then she notices something terrifying.
The heavy rear door of the van is hanging wide open. Snow is drifting inside.
And this brings us to the ultimate unpredictable variable in complex systems. We discussed earlier how Ashley viewed this entire horrific scenario as a tightly controlled performance. A magic trick where he manipulated every single piece on the board.
He thought he had it all figured out.
He accounted for the blizzard. He accounted for the oblivious bystanders Ed and Sandy. He even accounted for Darby's interference and turned it into his own amusement.
But in any chaotic survival situation, in any complex system, there's always a wild card.
This raises an important question. You cannot control every variable. Every action has an unpredictable reaction, often referred to in chaos theory as the butterfly effect. A small change in one state can result in massive differences in a later state.
And the wild card here is a terrified 7-year-old girl named Jameson.
Because of the knife.
Right. When Darby was trapped in the van earlier, right before she ran back to the visitor center, she had secretly pressed her tiny 2-inch Swiss Army knife into Jay's hands through the cage.
She empowered the child.
She told the little girl to saw at the plastic and wire of the kennel bars, and Jay actually did it. While Darby was fighting for her life inside, Jay meticulously sawed through the wire, kicked the weakened cage open, opened the back door of the van, and escaped into the sub-zero blizzard.
She is out there in the dark, in the howling wind, wearing nothing but a thin t-shirt.
The irony here is just gut-wrenching. Darby's heroic intervention, her insistence on giving the girl a weapon and a chance, actually resulted in putting the child in far greater, more immediate danger.
If Jay had stayed locked in the cage inside the running van, she would have been warm.
Now she is facing imminent, guaranteed death by hypothermia.
It highlights the chaos of unintended consequences. Darby's actions, driven by pure empathy and a desperate desire to save a life, have precipitated a crisis that is arguably worse than the captivity itself.
And Ashley's carefully constructed illusion of total control has completely irreparably unraveled.
The one variable his psychopathic brain couldn't account for was the sheer resilience and desperate ingenuity of a terrified 7-year-old girl given a tiny sliver of a chance.
This completely alters the stakes of the narrative. The situation shifts instantly from a contained hostage dynamic inside a heated building to a frantic, deadly search and rescue mission in a lethal environment.
And Ashley, ever the opportunist, immediately uses this horrific new reality against Darby.
He and Lars catch up to her at the open van. Ashley points his gun at her and calmly points out that Jay will freeze to death in minutes in this wind chill. He forces Darby to walk ahead of them, tracking the little girl's tiny footprints into the dark, freezing woods.
Acting as bait.
And then he makes Darby call out to Jay. He knows Jay won't come to his voice or to Lars's voice because they are the monsters who put a nail through her hand.
But she might come to Darby's voice.
So Darby is forced to wander through the deep snow, shining a flashlight, shouting the little girl's name, knowing that she is acting as live bait. I want you to feel the sheer weight of that guilt as a listener.
The text says it felt like a twisting dagger in her gut.
She is lying to a freezing child, calling out into the dark, promising her it is safe to come out, when she knows 2 armed killers are standing right behind her in the shadows, waiting to snatch the girl back. It is a chilling, devastating cliffhanger.
It forces us to confront the true psychological cost of heroism. In popular media, doing the right thing is often portrayed as clean, simple, and ultimately rewarding.
But in reality, survival and heroism are incredibly messy.
They involve devastating choices, moral compromises, and they often result in profound moral injury. Moral injury is a psychological trauma that occurs when an individual is forced to act in a way that transgresses their deeply held moral beliefs.
Darby is forced to compromise her own morality lying to a vulnerable child to lure her out in a desperate, agonizing bid to keep that child from freezing to death in the snow.
It perfectly encapsulates the psychological torment the author has woven flawlessly through the physical survival narrative.
What an absolute journey. From the claustrophobic, altitude sickness-inducing isolation of a snowed-in rest stop, to the shocking, paradigm-shifting betrayal by a charismatic stranger, to brutal, suffocating physical fights in a public restroom, and now ending with a terrifying, morally compromising search in the frozen woods. The depth of the text for this deep dive is just relentless.
The core takeaways here are deeply resonant for anyone interested in the human condition. We've explored the highly deceptive nature of appearances and how our evolutionary brains use flawed shortcuts, like the halo effect, to assess danger.
We've seen how empathy, which is typically our greatest human virtue, can be systematically hacked and weaponized by those who lack a conscience.
But most importantly, we've witnessed the incredible primal resilience of the human mind. When pushed to the absolute brink, when stripped of all technological and social safety nets, the human will to live, often fueled by our messy, painful connections to others, can override our biology and overcome seemingly insurmountable odds.
It definitely makes you look at the world and the people around you a little differently. So I want to leave you with a final, provocative thought to mull over as you go about your day. Think about the last time you were in a public place, a rest stop on the highway, a local coffee shop, a doctor's waiting room.
We sit in these brightly lit spaces, and we implicitly assume a social contract of safety and normalcy.
We trust that the person drinking coffee next to us is just another traveler, another normal person living their life. But based on the psychology we've unpacked today, If the illusion of that safety shattered tomorrow and you were suddenly thrust into a life or death survival situation with the strangers around you, would your empathy and your instinct to trust be your greatest superpower, or would it be the exact string a predator pulls to trap you? Thank you so much for joining us on this intense deep dive into the source material. We will see you next time.